Welcome back to another episode of Rock Boys Football. 5 most important breakout players for this Alabama program heading into 2024. And Dill, at least personally, these are some of my favorite episodes to do because we talk a lot about this Alabama program, but a lot of our conversations regard kind of the returning starters, the star players for this Alabama program. Now we get the opportunity to kind of call our shot, talk about some players that don't often get talked about by the national media, but kind of answering the question, if Alabama reaches their potential in 2024, you're probably seeing breakout seasons from these 5 players. Fired up to get into it. Before we do, and as always, just want to say thank you to you guys and to the Alabama fans and talking this program on the recruiting trail the last couple of weeks. The amount of support has been absolutely amazing. Can't thank you guys enough. If y'all do enjoy the content, consider subscribing to the channel. Much more importantly, would love to hear some of your breakout players and, more importantly, the most important breakout players for this Alabama program. And Dill, without further ado, let's get into a player that we've loved since he's come out of high school. That's former 5-star cornerback Deanii Jackson, transferring to Alabama from USC, a guy that hasn't really reached his potential yet. But you talk about a player that, from a physical trait standpoint, it checks every single box that you want in an elite cornerback at the SEC level. That's a guy in Deanii Jackson. Now, can he reach that potential for this Alabama program in 2024? If he does, massive storyline for this Alabama program.
I think what makes him such a key to what Alabama is going to be doing is if it's not him, they're going to be so young in that secondary.
Yeah.
There's a good chance you see Xavier Brown and possibly Mincy too. You could be looking at 2 true freshmen starting cornerbacks, which, yeah, those 2 are super talented guys. Corners, I feel like when they have the athleticism, can play early, so you don't hate necessarily where you're at. But I think you'd like to see Deanii Jackson emerge and be that guy and take some pressure off the young guys.
It's going to be a young secondary room regardless. And I think that's what makes Deanii Jackson kind of reaching his potential so important. And again, you talk about Deanii Jackson, why do we love this kid coming out of high school in modern day? 10-3 in the 100-meter dash, 6'1", 190 pounds. He's long. He has the vertical speed. He had the ball skills at the high school level. And Dill, I'm not going to write Deanii Jackson off. It was obviously a tough start to his collegiate career, his first 2 years at USC. I mean, he was working with arguably the worst defensive coaching staff that you saw in the country. He comes to Alabama. I think there's a lot of reason to kind of believe that he puts it together for Alabama. And again, if he does it, this is an all-conference cornerback in my mind for Alabama. Getting to, Dill, our next player that I think is a massive storyline for Alabama, that's defensive lineman Jem Otis. This is your guy, a guy that when you watch the film, the flashes are just so impressive. Now he's going into year 3. I think the question is, can he turn those flashes into kind of consistent dominance at the SEC level? You look at all the programs that have had elite defenses, right? Michigan in 2023, the Georgia Bulldogs the last couple of years. What do all those programs have in common? They have game wreckers on the inside of the defensive line. I think Jem Otis is capable of doing that. You look at Tim Smith, Tim Keenan, really good football players for Alabama. I think we both agree that Jem Otis has by far the highest upside in that defensive line room. And if he breaks out going into year 3, that's another just massively important player for this Bama program in 2024.
Because, again, those 2 guys you just mentioned, they just don't have the ceiling that he has. I mean,
Yeah.
You see the athletic traits, the size, the length, the quickness off the ball. And when he's playing really, really well, I think you see them flashes of him using his hands really effectively, shedding blocks at a higher level than Tim Keenan, Tim Smith, some of those other guys who are just more your heavyweights, do the dirty work, keep your linebackers free. And you certainly need that. But, again, if you want to, like, Alabama's going to be like vintage Alabama, if you will, it will have something to do with Jem Otis being a dominant player, not just a really good player.
100% agree. And let's go one more guy on the defensive side of the football. And this is the definition of my guy. Now, I don't think you're going to hear a lot about this kid going into the 2024 season. Dill, Jamari and Leam. I think the Alabama fans are familiar with this kid if you watch the spring game. You turn on the spring game and say, this kid is dominating up front for Alabama, and why this is such a big storyline. One of the questions that we have about this Alabama program is you got to replace two NFL caliber edge rushers off the end, right? Guys like Dallas Turner, Chris Braswell. Who's going to step up? I think a lot of people want to gravitate to some of the young guys going into year two, Keely, Yanza Pierre. Look at Jamari and Leam and say, this might be the best edge rusher on Alabama's team heading into the 2024 year. And if he can emerge as a guy that dominates the way he did when we watched that spring game, another massive breakout candidate for this Alabama program.
And what stuck out to me is it seemed like the athleticism is kind of getting there. I mean, you knew he's a big physical defensive end, and that's kind of was his game for a time when he was playing last year. But again, you saw a little bit more of that burst, a little bit more of that flexibility, that ability to work on the edge. So if he can put that together in the spring, I think that's huge for a similar reason. I think like having Deanii Jackson play good at the corner spot's big is because otherwise you're looking at a lot of young guys who are ultra talented, no doubt. Credit to Alabama for keeping those guys around after Saban left. But I think you want a couple of veterans who you can really rely on to be the guy.
You mentioned something that stood out to me, and that was the juice he had off the line of scrimmage. Like that first step was devastating in the spring game. And again, Jamari and Leam, he played a decent amount for Alabama in the 2023 season. Obviously, it's hard to get consistently in that rotation when you have guys like Dallas Turner on the defensive line. I kind of had a conception of him as just being kind of a heavy-handed edge guy that's going to be good in the run game. Again, you turn on the film from the Alabama spring game and say, there's a little bit more juice to this guy. This is a guy that could be a 10-sack a season guy for Alabama. And again, you could talk about, this is probably one of the more important positions for this Alabama program, right? You have so much talent on this defensive line, specifically in that edge room, but a lot of that talent is kind of unproven. And again, it's not necessarily a bad thing because you had two NFL caliber guys last year. With some of these guys getting more opportunity, if they can break out, that's a massive story for this Bama program.
You know who else I feel like I have to shout out at that kind of edge rusher role is Quindarius Robinson. I thought the flashes you saw from him, I mean, a very, very twitchy athlete. I was kind of watching the Arkansas game, just his ability to beat blocks with just sheer quickness. Again, there's a lot of talent in this room. You need some guys to kind of play that all SEC level play. Again, if Alabama is going to be contending for the SEC and a national title. So and you have all the talent. It's just you kind of look around like, well, who's going to be that guy? Our guy, for sure, Jamari and Leam, but there's a lot of other guys I think you'd toss.
Yeah, the edge room is like the definition of why I think so many people are missing on this Alabama team. Like they see the NFL draft picks going to the draft. They see some big names hit the transfer portal. And for some reason, like the casual college football fan just assumes Alabama doesn't have any talent on this team heading into the SEC until you kind of do some research into this program and say, yeah, this team is still one of the most talented programs that you see in the country heading into 2024. It's just some names that I think college football fans that just turn on some Alabama games on a Saturday afternoon probably don't recognize. These guys are all damn good football players. And now I think the question is, all right, who puts it together for Alabama in 2024? Let's go to the offensive side of the football and let's talk about Kaden Proctor. Though why he is, in my mind, an important breakout player is one, when you have a dominant left tackle, we all know what this kid can be. He can be one of the best left tackles that you see in the country in 2024. But I think more importantly, if Kaden Proctor becomes that dominant left tackle, you're looking at a left side of the offensive line that is by far the best in the country because you have the best like interior offensive lineman and Tyler Booker playing right next to him. If Kaden Proctor kind of takes that step going into year two, and Kalen DeBoer is not used to having this kind of offensive line. And if Kaden Proctor can become that guy, you're looking at a seriously dangerous run game, but also giving some Jalen Milroe a little bit more time in the pocket to push the ball down the field. Massive story for Alabama is, can Kaden Proctor emerge as not just a solid left tackle? Can he be one of the best left tackles in the country? That's the question with Kaden Proctor.
And you can get that offense where you saw at times during that Georgia game when you were like, oh, this is the Alabama we expected all year.
Yes.
Being able to grind teams down, run guys off the ball. I mean, again, I think there was that one double team with him and Tyler Booker. I don't think you've seen a more textbook kind of demonstration of how you're supposed to play offensive line than that. So if they have him rolling, they got Tyler Booker rolling. I love what else they have. Obviously, Roberts, we think's a star in his own right.
Yes, he is.
They should be a dominant offensive line, but I think a lot of that hinges, frankly, on Kaden Proctor not having those games like the Michigan game.
And again, that's the storyline with Kaden Proctor is you go to the Georgia film, that's one of the best left tackles in the country. But then you go to the Michigan film and say, all right, that's a true freshman left tackle that has some serious work to do in his game. I think going into year two, kind of like we talked about with some other players, finding that consistency, kind of like we talked about with Jem Otis, you see the flashes of being one of the most dominant line of scrimmage players in college football. Now in year two, as a collegiate football player, can you find that consistency, have those Georgia performances every single Saturday? That's the story with a guy like Kaden Proctor. Last player we got to talk about, and I kind of just want to have the conversation with the whole wide receiver room, and that is who kind of emerges as that wide receiver one. And I don't know if this Alabama team will have a true wide receiver one because there are just a lot of names that I think Kalen DeBoer is going to look to get involved. You look back at that Washington team, yeah, Rome was their wide receiver one, but it was going to a lot of different players. Let's talk about Kendrick Law. This is a guy that is, in my mind, meant to play in a Kalen DeBoer offense where you're getting the football quickly, in space, operating after the catch. There are not many wide receivers in the country that can move like him after the catch. If Kalen DeBoer can do a better job of getting him the football in space, you're looking at a devastating playmaker for Alabama in 2024.
Yeah, some of those plays stick in my mind. That Auburn play, that play against LSU where he catches one in the flat, and just his smoothness and how quickly he can kind of get to the edge, turn up, and get rolling. It's really, really unique. I think his ability to run and what you said, I think it perfectly sums up what you hope to see from Kendrick Laws. Again, get a little bit more room to operate with the ball in his hands because that's where he shines. I don't know that he's the greatest route runner in the history of college football. Not that I think he can't be. It's just that's not what we've seen from him so far in his college career. But when you see him get the ball with a little bit of space, just the acceleration, the smoothness, his ability to make guys miss it, there aren't many who do it like him. So, yeah, I think he should have a huge year if Kalen DeBoer can get him some cracks of daylight to make.
And you look at what Kalen DeBoer did so well. Everyone likes to point out, all right, Michael Penix was the least sacked quarterback in all of college football in the 2023 year. Yes, that was a solid offensive line for Washington. More importantly, it was Kalen DeBoer, Michael Penix just getting the football out on time quickly, and that is going to be massive for Jalen Milroe. If you can cut down on some of those negative plays we saw Alabama take in the 2023 season, that's huge for this Alabama offense. Now, this wide receiver room, it's just full of breakout candidates, right? You could talk about Jeremy Bernard coming from Washington. We all saw the spring game. He could be the wide receiver one. You have a guy in Ryan Williams who's a true freshman. Dill, if you were asking me right now to bet on who leads this team in receiving yards, I don't normally say true freshman. Ryan Williams would be on that list. Again, just a different kind of cat in terms of the movement skills and the explosiveness with the football in his hand and working vertically down the field. This Alabama wide receiver room is chock full with breakout candidates. I think the question is, all right, who is going to be the one to put it together and kind of emerge as the playmakers, the difference makers for this Alabama offense? That'll do it for us. Dill, a couple guys, Justice Haynes, that's another breakout candidate that could mean massive things for Alabama. Love to hear from you guys in the comment section. Appreciate you guys rocking with the fellas. We'll talk to y'all later. Peace.